Hello everyone. Thanks for overwhelming response on our CCDC trainings. So this will be first video in a series of videos that we are planning for preparing preparing for CCDC competition. So there are a few software requirements that we have for this competition and some products that are more important than others for preparing for CCDC competition. In past few years, the competition hosts have been using VMware based tools. So first thing we will do is download this VMware workstation player. So you can Google it and download and install it. The next thing that we will do is try to set up a small network with a few virtual machines, and here are the links for the different machines that we need. For Windows, we have Windows Server 2012. Then for Linux, we have different flavors. We have Ubuntu. We have so Ubuntu is based on the Debian series of Linux, and Fedora is based on Red Hat series of Linux, and Arch Linux also features on the competition. So here are the links to download these VM images. I already have these images, so what I'll do is I'll start building up a small data center kind of environment or a small network. So first thing I'll do is like uh, from the VM images that we downloaded. Let's first get Ubuntu. Let's provide it name, username. I'll just give password 123456. You would want to have a more secure password for competition, obviously. We can give it 20 gigabits of disk space. I have provided this virtual machine with 2 gigabits of RAM, and this virtual machine starts booting up. So you might have noticed that it took something known as DHCP in one of the previous screen. That is an important keyword to note. And I will explain later how there are two different forms by which a virtual machine is assigned IP address. One is DHCP, another is static IP address assignment. So I'll pause the recording here for a bit and let this virtual machine boot up. If you have questions on different settings for installing Ubuntu virtual machine, you can ping one of our mentors. So while the first virtual machine is booting up and it will start showing up here on the VMware workstation player, what I can do is I can simultaneously create another virtual machine. So let's pick up Fedora. And again, we follow the same procedure. We give it probably 20 gigabits of RAM. So in this section, you can customize the hardware settings. Since I am a bit constrained on the RAM, I can reduce the RAM size. So let's say this has 1 gigabit of RAM, and this will reflect here, and we will press finish. And you will observe that Fedora machine also started booting up. So our Ubuntu machine has booted up, and we can log into Ubuntu, provide password 123456, and you will see that we are dropped into this shell prompt. So while Fedora is booting up, I'll go over few basic commands in Ubuntu. So ls will give you information on what is present in the current directory. You can see which directory you are in. You are in the home folder and the user is Ubuntu. We can check the users in the system. Currently, we have Ubuntu as the only user. We can upgrade our permissions to root user by sudo -i, and now we are root. Root allows us to do more privileged actions. We can exit from root. From a networking perspective, let's see using ifconfig what is the current IP address of this machine. So you will observe that the IP address is 192.168.222.0.0. 1 to 8. We will check some useful configuration files. Resolve.conf contains the name server of the current network that we have. So you will see the IP address of the name server is present. So a useful package that we can install is VIM. It is a text-based editor. The host configuration file consists of the name and IP address mapping of different system. The default IP address uh, is 127.0.0.1, and it is also referred to as localhost. So if you are making any changes to this file, for example, you want to say that the 127.0.0.1 can also be referred to as burrito. You can insert this change and use exclamation WQ to save and quit. So you will notice that it is preventing me from writing. That is because it's a file that requires me to have sudo privilege or higher privilege than the current user. So once I use sudo with the command, and for some reason it inserted a whole lot of junk, and I can use dd to delete the particular line on which I am at currently. So apparently on Fedora, there are some additional steps that we need to take. So there is an option on this live ISO which asks you to install this ISO on a virtual hard disk. So you can select the installation destination, and we selected this particular disk. We mark it done. We wait for it to check some configuration options and begin installation. And it will take some time to install. It will ask you to create a user on the system, which is pretty standard, and you can provide it a standard password. So we will pause till the Fedora finishes installing. So the Fedora installation is also complete, and what we can do is we can add some users and assign them passwords. So I added a user Fedora. The command sudo is important to add users, and we can use password command to assign password to Fedora. And if we want to check list of all users, we can check that in etc passwords. So you'll observe that we created Fedora and user, and they are present in this file. Next thing we will do is we will check the IP address of this machine, and you will observe that it's 192.168.222.129. So if we check the virtual machine settings and check the network adapter, it is NAT based adapter, and there is a useful distinction that I would like to make, or provide information on different kind of network settings. We will primarily deal with the NAT, which is network address translation. What that means is that the IP address of the host system, which is my current PC, this will act as kind of the router for outgoing packets from these virtual machines. So if these are list of virtual machines and this is my host PC, so these packets will be routed through this NAT-based networking. Whereas if I want to create a separate virtual network similar to a virtual private network for these machines, we will use host-only networking. So we can ping between these two machines that we have. So, so the next thing we will check is to install some useful services. Secured shell is one of the very important services on CCDC, and it is used for logging in between different systems, doing some remote operations. So we'll install it on both systems. On a Red Hat based system, yum install is the method for installing SSH package. And on a Debian based system like Ubuntu, we can use apt-get to install the SSH package. The SSH package has been installed. So let's see what we can do using SSH package. So we can try to log in on the Ubuntu system from the Fedora system using SSH. So we will use Ubuntu at the rate IP address of the Ubuntu system, which is 192.168.222.128, and we can provide the password. So now we have logged in on the Ubuntu system from the Fedora system, and we can similarly log from Fedora system to Ubuntu. We can create some files and transfer them from Fedora to Ubuntu. So we will specify the name of the files that we want to transfer using SCP, the machine on which we want to transfer, and the directory on that machine where we want the file to go. And you will observe that files have been transferred. So let's create a file c.txt, and let's try to get the file from Ubuntu to Fedora. So what we will do is we will specify the full path, and dot means like we want the file to be in current directory. So we will see that c.txt has been transferred. Now an important thing for the SSH service is the SSH configuration file. So the file is located under the directory etc sshd config, and we do not have the vim installed currently, so we will use the va editor. So there are a different number of options here. You can change the port on which the SSH service is hosted. If you want to prevent the port scanning kind of attacks on a standard port, maybe you can host it on a higher port. You can do logging of the different users. By default, the remote login is kind of disabled on the Red Hat versions. So you can enable the password authentication, and what you will do is you will check the you can restart the service. The D stands for daemon, so the SSH service is running in background as a daemon. And we will start the service. You can check the status of the service. to see if it is running or not. We can try logging in from Ubuntu to Fedora, which was successful. Now, how do we observe if a remote attacker or a user from a different IP address has logged into our system? So very important directory, and we will elaborate on this particular directory when we discuss the log analysis in detail. So we will go to var log and we will run the command last log. So you will see that on September 10th, the user Fedora logged in from this particular IP address. So this will give you information when you are doing forensics and trying to see that if a red team member has logged into your system. Similarly, we can go to the var log on Ubuntu and we can run last log. So you will see that the Ubuntu user from IP address 192.168.222.129, which happens to be the IP address of this machine, logged into our system. We can also check the authentication logs using auth log. So you will see that the SSH service was opened using the IP address of the remote host 192.168.222.129, and the remote port, like a random port which is used by remote host to connect, was 50278. So if you will use the command grep, then you can specifically grep for the SSH related activity.